We are now moving to understanding what about these words are important to know. Children have exposure to a range of words, we know that, but do we know what those words demand of them? So let's start with Filipino first, after which we'll go to Kannada. So may I ask Dr. Mary Ann Bacolod and her team to start off.
Hi, I'm Portia Padilla from the College of Education, University of the Philippines, Diliman. My colleagues and I will talk to you about the implications of morphological awareness for Filipino language and literacy assessment. The current study is part of a larger language mapping endeavor that has been undertaken to help inform the development of good language and literacy assessments in Filipino. First, a sentence corpus was derived from children's books. The sentences were tagged for 5 major parts of speech, or POS, namely noun, pronoun, verb, adjective, and adverb. From these tagged words came the word corpus, or the age of acquisition word list. In turn, the age of acquisition word list was where the words in this current study were derived. Why morphological awareness? While an understanding that words can be broken down into meaningful units like roots and affixes has been found to positively influence language and literacy development, and that morphological awareness develops across time, beginning as early as kindergarten, and it can transfer across languages. Yet, unfortunately, many teachers do not know about morphological awareness or understand its importance. So now is as good a time as any to know more about morphological awareness. And we cannot not learn more about morphological awareness without looking at roots and affixes. So the next few slides will have Professor Mary Ann Bacolod talk to you about affix mapping in Filipino.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Ann Bacolod from the University of the Philippines. Let me present to you the process we used for analyzing the morphological characteristics of selected words, Filipino words from the Child Directed Corpus, as well as some of the results we have derived from the analysis. Now, in order to understand the characteristics of words in the corpus, we conducted an affix mapping analysis with the following objectives. First, we wanted to find out what are the most productive affixes that can be found from the corpus, as well as what are the most productive word tokens that can be found in the corpus. Specifically, what word types have the most number of unique affixes attached to them, what are the functions of each affix, and what are the characteristics of the selected words in the corpus. Here we wanted to look into the processes involved in the formation of the selected words. For the process, we selected the common word roots found from the Department of Education Learning Materials for Kindergarten and the Age of Acquisition word list through Sukatwika, an analyzer that provides word and text level metrics. The target total number for this analysis is 150, with the target distribution of 70 verbs, 50 nouns, and 30 adjectives. Initially, we generated only 62 common verb roots. We generated 95 noun roots and 32 adjective roots. Now, in order to meet the target distribution of words, we derived the 8 most frequently occurring verb roots from the sentence corpus to complete the 70 verb token target. For nouns, we analyzed and prioritized the most productive noun roots and came up with 12 productive noun roots from the corpus. Then we derived the remaining 38 most frequently occurring among the common nouns from the corpus. For adjectives, the most productive 30 adjectives were chosen. Now we run this through Sukatwika again to get all possible word derivations and inflections from the sentence corpus. Then finally, we conducted a morphological analysis by looking into the processes involved in the formation of these words and by mapping the affixes we found. Overall, the basis of the data used for analysis are the sentence corpus of TalkTogether project consisting of 1,743 sentences, the age of acquisition list of words with 885 total words, and the DepEd learning materials for kindergarten with 1,638 sentences. From these, we were able to generate 374 derived words from 70 verb tokens, 157 derived words from 50 noun tokens, and 119 derived words from 30 adjective tokens, with a total of 650 words for analysis. Now, we included the Department of Education learning materials for kindergarten in selecting the 150 common word roots along with the age of acquisition word list, since these materials include vocabulary expected to be learned by and intended to be taught to children, and is also highly representative, meaning it's accessible and of wider circulation throughout the country. On the rationale for selecting more verbs than the other categories, we believe that verbs in Filipino language introduce more new forms because of its affixes. It's richer and more productive in terms of affixes that can be attached to it, and we also believe that verbal paradigms may better demonstrate the child's linguistic competence and lexical sophistication. With regard to the steps for affix mapping, first we created the matrix for encoding relevant morphological information that includes information on the affix, the meaning, the part of speech category, function, morphological and morphophonemic processes involved in the formation of these words. Then we summarized all the necessary information for affix mapping analysis and came up with the final matrix that you're seeing right now in this slide for analysis, which includes information on the affixes identified, the affix types, the function, rules, frequency count, and sample words derived from the affix, which we mapped based on the affix types. From this, we were able to identify a total of 121 affixes, in which 72 are verb-forming affixes, 27 are noun-forming affixes, and 22 are adjective-forming affixes. In terms of how varied are the functions of these affixes, functions of verb-forming affixes found in the corpus include aspect, focus, and mode. Functions of noun-forming affixes include expressing relation, abstractness, collective meaning, occupation, instrument, among others. And functions of adjective-forming affixes include degree, plurality, expressing concrete or abstract meaning, quality, among others. Aside from these, we also found words in the corpus which undertake morphophonemic changes, such as the D to R alternation, where the sound D is replaced by R during affixation, as in the word, for example, paligid becomes kapaligiran. Epenthetic H, where the H sound is added to words ending in vowels before affixation, as in the word pupunta plus an becomes pupuntahan. Deletion of vowels in a word during affixation, lalagay becomes lalagyan. Consonant deletion and vowel raising, as in tulong becomes tulungan. So now I'll turn you over to Professor Jem Javier to give you more of the analysis that we found in terms of affix productivity and word productivity. Thank you.
Magandang araw. My name is Jem R. Javier from the UP Department of Linguistics. At this point, we'll delve further into the data, particularly on the productivity of the affixes and word tokens elicited from the corpora. Of the 10 most frequently used verb-forming affixes, the least ones had a frequency count of 12, while the most frequently used affix, the prefix na, has a frequency count of 22. The affixes presented in the table, as in most of the verb-forming affixes in the map, have at least two functions, focus and aspect. A third function, the mode, is also added to some affixes such as na, si1v1, ma, and naka, giving the respective derived verb forms additional semantic information. We can also see a relatively well-distributed frequency count of the verb-forming affixes. On the other hand, the two tables demonstrate that the noun and adjective-forming affixes have a very skewed distribution of frequency counts, with 14 for the most frequently used noun-forming affix pag, then followed by the circumfix kaan and prefix pag C1V1 with just 7 each. A much more bias may be seen among the adjective-forming affixes, with 27 for the most frequently used affix ma, and just 6 for the second most frequently used affix ma C1V1. Moreover, most of the noun and adjective-forming affixes provide only one additional function to the root or stem that they attach to. We have also found 13 polysemous pairs or clusters in the map. 6 of them are presented in the table. We may notice that the polysemous affixes differ in the POS that they give rise to the respective derived forms. This next table shows the word tokens with the most number of affixes attached. We have selected the forms that garnered a frequency count of 10 or higher. From the corpora, the token kita has the most number of affixed forms with 14, followed by sabi with 12 and isip with 11. The tokens kain, punta, and gawa each has 10 derived forms. From the table, we can make a couple of observations as well. First, most of the affixed forms fall under the verb POS. And second, although one may say that the roots isip and gawa belong to the noun POS, most, if not all, of their derived forms are actually verbs. So there might be some discrepancy if we use a root-based rather than an affix-based categorization in relation to the affixes that attach to them. So to summarize, an affix map was formed in order to get a clearer, albeit very large picture of the level of lexical sophistication and morphological competence in relation to the affixes found in Child Directed Corpus of Filipino. Subcategorization in Filipino as a Philippine type language with a very complicated and rich morphological system is not strictly root-based. The POS of the words cannot be easily determined at the root level, even if we establish a root as belonging to the noun POS. Most, if not all, of its affixed forms are verbs. Moreover, some forms occur with petrified affixes already, such as kabuluhan from buluh, which is not used in spoken or written form. Roots, stems, and derived or affixed forms are indiscriminately distributed across different POSs. Meanwhile, one affix may carry different functions, such as the prefix pa, which may function as a noun, verb, or adjective-forming affix, each with its own semantics. Finally, the portmanteau of information encoded in most of the verb-forming affixes are morphosyntactic in nature, whereas most of the noun and adjective-forming affixes, which carry only a single function, provide additional semantic information to the root or stem that they attach to. The next slides will be presented by Professor Portia Padilla, who will discuss the last part of our presentation. Maraming salamat po.
What are the implications for Filipino language and literacy assessment? Let me name a few. Primarily, child-directed corpora can inform the review, revision, and further development of assessment measures for language and literacy. It is important to review and revise as needed vocabulary measures, to take into account the variety of parts of speech, also to consider that the part of speech of words cannot be easily determined at the root level, and also to reflect the semantic functions of noun-forming and adjective-forming affixes. It is also important to review and revise as needed existing grammar awareness measures, to take into account the productivity of verbs, to reflect the syntactic functions of verb-forming affixes, and also to consider functions of affixes vis-a-vis the level of learners to be assessed. It is also important to consider looking into the meaning-making role of morphophonologically dynamic words in passages in reading comprehension tests. It would also be important to consider developing a morphological awareness measure that takes into account the productivity of verbs, the most productive words and affixes, the fact that one affix may carry different functions, and also the morphophonemic changes in words. Currently, there is no morphological awareness measure in Filipino. And finally, it would be important to consider cross-referencing the assessment measures with another corpus-based analysis, such as the age of acquisition word list. On behalf of all those who made this presentation possible, I say thank you. Salamat po.
I think, Dr. Mary Ann, the affix mapping template that you developed was something that started from scratch, and it was an iterative process. Could you give us a
Yes.
few sort of insights into what were the challenges of developing an affix mapping map for Filipino?
Oh, it was quite hard. Well, we have to consider, of course, first how to be able to meet the objectives that we had presented a while ago before we did the affix mapping. And based on the objectives, we looked into what are the details that needed to be put into the matrix in terms of the affix mapping morphological analysis. So as I mentioned earlier, we initially put all the information regarding the affix types, as well as the whether it's inflectional, derivational, morphophonological processes, morphophonemic processes. Well, the main issue or the challenge that we basically faced when we were doing the analysis is on the idea of whether assigning one particular root to a one POS and assigning the roots, for example, whether they are, or the affixes, whether they are inflectional or derivational. So that's the reason why we use the word tokens instead, because we found out during the analysis that there are some words that does not necessarily have to be limited in one part of speech category alone in Filipino language.
One question then, Dr. Mary Ann, is if an understudied language wanted to start something like this, would an affix mapping template be a good place to start? Or do you think it's just too linguistically difficult and you really need high level of linguistic knowledge to do it?
I cannot say right now, because I think it will really have to depend on the nature of the language.
Right.
The aspect on how you're going to do the template for the affix mapping will really depend on the nature of what is the characteristics of the language that you are using or analyzing.
Yes, absolutely. We have in the audience people from Africa, people from Japan, from different parts of the world who are looking at other kinds of language, and they have their own characteristics. I also have in the chat a question on whether our affix mapping template will be made open source. I have replied to that saying our intention is to make it open source, but we need to address exactly the issue that Dr. Mary Ann has just said, that we need to know the limits of our template before we go public. But we aim to share whatever we produce in the project.